Dimitrije Davidović. Dimitrije Mita Davidović Zemun, Habsburg Monarchy, 12 October 1789, Smederevo, Principality of Serbia, 24 March 1838, was a Serbian politician serving as the Prime Minister of Serbia, Minister of Education, and Chief Secretary of Cabinet to Prince Miloš Obrenović I. He was also a writer, philosopher, journalist, publisher, historian, diplomat, and the founder of modern Serbian journalism and publishing. Early life. Dimitrije Davidović, born in Zemun on 12 October 1789, was the son of Gavrilo and Marija Đorđević. In 1789 his father, a regiment priest of the Serbian Orthodox Church in the Austrian army, was transferred to Zemun after the liberation of Belgrade from the Turks. His grandfather, Very Reverend David Đorđević, was a professor at the famed Latin school Latinska Škola at Sremski Karlovci, founded by Metropolitan Pavel Nenadović of the Serbian Orthodox Church. Dimitrije was a sickly child and as such was inclined to read and write instead of playing outdoors. He completed Serbian grammar school in Zemun and the Protestant Lyceum of Kežmarok, and his post-secondary education at Sremski Karlovci was guided by his professor of Latin, his paternal grandfather Đorđević. From there he then went to the universities of Pest and Vienna, where he first studied philosophy, then switched over to the University of Vienna's prestigious School of Medicine. He was early involved in the political troubles in which Serbia and the Serbian people were then immersed with the Turkish authorities in Istanbul, Constantinople. Dimitrije decided one day to take his grandfather's given name David as his surname Davidović to avoid detection by the authorities who were looking for him at the time. The first Serbian uprising, led by Karađorđe Petrović, started in 1804, but could not survive beyond 1813 without the support of the great powers. Soon came the second Serbian uprising under Miloš Obrenović I, Prince of Serbia, in 1815, which gained nominal concessions from the Sultan of Constantinople, thanks to the intervention of Imperial Russia. Publishing pioneer. While studying medicine in Vienna in 1812, Dimitrije Davidović wanted to start a Serbian newspaper, but could not get a license, which was personally denied by Klemens von Metternich himself. About 1813, in conjunction with a fellow student, Dimitrije Fruzic, he founded and edited a Serbian newspaper in Vienna called Novine Srpske Iskarstvo Juseg Gradovian Serbian News from the imperial city of Vienna, and Zabavnik Entertainment, in which many interesting particulars respecting the literature and political history of Serbia was published. Like Stefan von Novakovic, his predecessor, Davidović believed that any people who would like to be recognized as enlightened must have its national newspapers and magazines, which are essentially important for the 4 million Serbs living under the Habsburg yoke at the time. His Novine Srpske Iskarstvo Jusega Gradovian Serbian News from the imperial city of Vienna soon changed its direction from translations of travelogues, biographies, and writings on history to national issues, current events, and Serbian literature. Among the contributors in his newspaper and magazine were Lukajin Muzici, Simo Milutinović Sarajlija, Teodor Pavlović, Đorđević Magaresević, Danilo Mediković, and other prominent Serbian poets and writers. Both the newspaper and almanac were eventually suppressed by the Austrian government in 1821. He wrote Istorija Srbije, History of Serbia, 1813–1815, and what is now considered his best work, Azerbaidjanka Serbian Woman, 1826, an epic poem in praise of the liberation of Serbia, led by Karađorđe Petrović, 1804, and Miloš Obrenović, 1813. Serbian historiography at the revolutionary time of pre-Romanticism, it is said, has no better representative than Simon Pisevic, right up to Dimitrije Davidović. His History of the Serbian People was published for the first time in Vienna in 1821, and supplemented by lawyer Jovan Hadzik, was reprinted in 1846 by Grigorij Vazarovic. In 1848 the work was translated into French by Alfred Vignerin, secretary to Prince Miloš Obrenović of Serbia. His talents gained him the favorable notice of Prince Miloš Obrenović of Serbia, who appointed Davidović secretary of his offices at Belgrade and sent him on special diplomatic missions. According to Prince Miloš's judgment, Davidović was exceptionally talented in diplomacy. He resided in Belgrade and enjoyed the continued favor of the court. He headed the Serbian diplomatic delegation in Istanbul, Constantinople, Turkey, from 1829 to 1833. He is considered by Serbian historians as one of the most important diplomats of his era. In one of Davidovic's patriotic appeals on 3 August 1821, he pointed out the need for female children's education. Since the state was technically at war with the Turks and almost unable to concern itself with the opening of a girls' school which at the time was prohibited by Muslim Turkish law. He was Minister of Education and Minister for Foreign Affairs from 8 June 1834 to 2 December 1835. Candlemas Constitution. In 1835 he was placed at the head of a committee to draw up a Serbian constitution, and it was, after all, chiefly drawn up by himself. Called Sreten Ustav Candlemas Constitution, it was drafted by Dimitrije Davidović to secure Serbia protection of citizens before the state and transformation of Serbia into a legal state with protected human and property rights for all. It was the first step toward power sharing in modern Serb political history. But it was not to be expected that such sweeping changes could be effected without opposition, and no sooner the Sublime Porte and Austria brought their grievances against the implemented Sreten. Prince Miloš yielded to them, but many of Davidovic's followers were not so complacent, and it was only by threat of force of arms that the new constitution was abolished after being less than 3 weeks in force. Davidović and Prince Miloš sadly parted company under political pressure. Davidović withdrew from Belgrade to Smederevo, where he died 3 years later. Legacy. Dimitrije Davidović greatly distinguished himself as one of the most intrepid and influential supporters of the cause of liberalism in both political and religious matters, until his death at Smederevo, where he died on 24 March 1838. He belongs principally to the same class of writers as George Magaresevic, Fyodor Pavlović, and Danilo Medicovic, who worked tirelessly more on a cultural and political plane than literary. House of Dimitrije Davidović. The House of Dimitrije Davidović is located in Belgrade, in Zemun, at the corner of the Zemun Main Street and Davidović Street. It is part of the cultural monuments of exceptional importance and is protected by Serbia. The complex was developed from the mid-18th to mid-19th century and includes an inner courtyard. The house is a typical one-story residential house with 2 tracts, 6 windows, with long fronts on both sides of the street. The uniform facades comprise all the development phases of the building and contribute to an integral spatial impression. House represents a more modest variation of the classic townhouse, with harmonic proportions, simplicity, and coherence in the treatment of its facades.